We are going to start section 1, keynote speech, e-PBL and COVID-19. First presentation is COVID-19, the Catalyst for Educational Change, pivot with e-PBL. Speaker is Professor Margaret McMillan from University of Newcastle in Australia. She is an emeritus professor in School of Nursing. Especially, she has been an honorable advisor of JPBL for a long time. We appreciate her contribution to JPBL. Please, Margaret McMillan.
Thank you for the chance to speak with you today. I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 and the likelihood that a model such as PBL will enable you to pivot or change in response to the impact of a crisis such as COVID-19. I'm suggesting that problem-based learning curricula provide the scaffolding for integration of ideas and facilitate modification of learning activities when necessary. All stakeholders in higher education were impacted by COVID-19, and revolutionary change needed to happen quickly. Some things and people needed to change more than others. The lives of students in particular, those that were engaged in learning, were impacted. The regulatory bodies that manage programs were impacted. University administration and the learning and development centres, all the systems and processes that academics have to work with, as well as support personnel, had to pay attention in particular to students and what their needs were. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to a dramatic loss of human life worldwide and presents an unprecedented challenge to public health worldwide and the world of work. A case study centred on population health would be useful for student learning. But the central feature here is information literacy. That's more important now than it ever was, and must be a feature of curriculum design and implementation in a way that prepares students for the world of work. Working remotely is now common. Therefore, information literacy is important to prepare for working remotely. University student experiences of learning for work readiness must include computer literacy as well as information literacy. Key personnel in universities knew that they needed to support students first and foremost in the COVID-19 crisis. Student-centred, self-directed and work-integrated learning were already features of PBL, but e-learning platforms needed to align with the PBL design. So the coordinators in services all reflected ambitions to put students and their needs first, to put in place human resources that could support students. They had to turn their attention to redesigning existing models for learning, and they had to encourage students to be much more self-directed in their learning. So they had to pay attention to e-learning platforms so that they could be sure that ongoing enrolment was guaranteed and that students could complete their awards. So there were some innovations in e-learning and assessment of outcomes that needed to be taken up fairly quickly. In many instances, partnering with other sectors within society to achieve work-integrated learning was also necessary. So the suggestion was we had to think carefully and manage change strategically. Generally, students responded well to changes imposed by COVID-19 because they were natives of the digital age. Still, some needed support. One survey of over 30,000 students in 62 countries showed us that students now had to engage differently with educational programs. Generally, it showed that students were satisfied with the support they got from teaching staff in this time of change, and the university's public relations officers were also useful. But about 30% of students found their own limitations in computer skills and deficiencies were self-evident, and that they perceived that there were higher workloads that prevented them from gaining a level of performance that they were satisfied with in the new teaching environment. In Australia, universities are calling for a government response to a more strategic, all-encompassing approach to change in higher education. So there's a need to cause students to embrace student-centred and self-directed learning in a way that helps to prepare them for work and life. So we have to be really upfront with students and say, look, take advantage of e-learning, but this means accepting that things will be different. But being active in your approach to learning can be fun. E-learning can also be tailored to how you learn best. It involves development of self-direction in learning, and it really is probably much more student-centred than ever before. But you can still collaborate with others. You can find a mentor on whom to rely. And if you're a novice at this e-learning, you can buddy up with others who are new to this as well. E-learning offers virtual reality from which to learn. It's really important to recognise that while e-PBL allows educators to pivot or change, they still need to recognise that they themselves are learners. So professional development for academics needs to be in place. And this is true for older academics, but it's also true for new generations of staff members if we're going to pivot successfully. It's desirable that some of this professional development can also be conducted online and reflect the values and principles of problem-based learning. Teachers, therefore, need to understand student experiences with self-directed and student-centred learning. Academics have to make valid choices in assessments, and they need to know that if they're going to achieve learning goals, they should embrace professional development. The key to achieving contemporary student-centred learning outcomes that reflect the abilities needed in real life is in sound educational design. What's the framework for learning? Especially the use of authentic case studies. Online learning allows for a broad range of stimulus material to be used and changed when necessary. So the process pretty much remains the same. Being student-centred means analysing situations. Now that might be a policy, it might be your own practice or the practice of others, it might be actual or simulated learning events, it might be scenarios, videos, photos. Students need to develop propositions or different perspectives identify problematic situations, and think about possible responses. It's really important to understand what they already know or what they don't know, and it's the latter that they need to investigate. E-learning can involve individuals, pairs, or groups. It's the same process of prioritising learning needs, setting goals around the core ideas, and identifying resources for yourself or the group members to investigate. Engaging in individual self-study and preparation is important. Within group or online forums, new knowledge can be shared on the core ideas. All group members can be involved in review or critique of information, but it's important that that's applied to the initial stimulus material. What's the preferred response? What are acceptable alternatives? And lastly, student-centred learning involves reflecting on new knowledge, responses to situations, and the effectiveness of the processes used. So, in the world of work, I've said we need graduates who have the know-how to engage with contemporary media and technology, look carefully at the worthiness of available information for their context of practice. Where COVID-19 is involved, this has been really critical to managing the spread of the virus. So information literacy means using contemporary media, technology, library and relevant databases to access and manage interprofessional knowledge for practice. And the second thing is being literate means you are assessing the worthiness, the appropriateness and reliability of the information you are finding. Now, my son is a mature age paramedic student in his final year of a program using PBL in an online mode offered originally to 200 students for the first time within that particular Australian university. When COVID-19 struck, 400 on-campus students had to pivot to the online mode. The major impact for his student cohort was the inclusion of the larger group in the e-learning environment. So I simply asked him, what changed in a PBL paramedic program after COVID-19? He said the important things were simple, well-designed platforms that enabled group work, relevant resources that had good links, clear decision points, good podcasts, and weekly study guides. So he said the case design has to be good. He pointed out to me that the remaining 150 students in the online student cohort knew how to be self-directed, but the 400 on-campus students had to adapt. Access and equity for all this larger cohort was often difficult to achieve. Online lecturers, he said, varied in usefulness and quality. Some were over-reliant on textbooks. He said, teachers make the difference with good online classroom management. PowerPoints with notes were useful. A student portal provided students with answers to the top 5 questions they asked. He said there were more self-assessment activities, videos of skills acquisition, paired peer learning, quizzes, and that students themselves generated lists of assessment tasks, maybe up to 20, and then they voted on the 2 most significant things that they thought were important to assess. There were some negative impacts for the original online group. that arose from the expansion of the student group. So he said the volume of people online at any one time was sometimes problematic. Google Rooms that were made available for large groups sometimes simply didn't cope. Zoom platforms changed along the way. When they were doing exams, there was a lot of traffic all at the same time. So they moved to rooms of 20 people so that students could be invigilated or watched over very carefully. Time wasting in exam question sequences were problematic. It wasn't easy to scroll back to previous questions. Intensive weeks were familiar to remote learners. They had to come in for 4 days at a time. These were called intensives. But the on-campus students hadn't been accustomed to doing this. The last thing he said was, professional development of staff is essential. So the major thing that seems to have changed during COVID-19 were the assessment tasks. Now, I want to remind you that for students, assessment equates to learning if it does what it says it will do. Therefore, there is a need to ask, if I use this assessment task, what learning outcomes am I causing the students to demonstrate? So, the same range of suitable assessment items can be available to online or on-campus learning activities. But some will not be possible in the face-to-face on-campus mode. Therefore, students can be caused to video themselves completing skills-based assessments that are no longer possible on campus, and then they can upload the video. Peers can assess this video, some components of it. Students can work in groups online, but show evidence of completion of allocated individual contributions. Students can reflect on any of their own assessment tasks completed online. Adequate reflection is the core element being assessed. Online quizzes and exams can monitor both formative and summative progress. So, experience shows that e-PBL works. Educational design matters. Students are learners, and so are the teachers. They need to share the vision for student learning processes and the values and principles underpinning the design and the implementation of any curriculum philosophy. Professional development should include the use of the same methodology that we argue is necessary for contemporary students in the digital age. So, it's the ownership of values and principles and the vision that needs to be acceptable. Teachers need to share the vision for student-centred learning processes. Teachers are learners too, especially when emerging technologies align with student needs. There's a need for professional development in times of change, but it should be professional development that mirrors the design, values and principles of the e-learning environment. So, renewal is possible while retaining the original framework. Students need support to achieve their goals, but must take responsibility for their own learning in a way that is consistent with the program goals. Both students and teachers need to be information literate. Now, to conclude, I want to show you a video. When you watch this video, it is of my son, one of his videos that he had to upload, but he's working with a peer. Now, he has to demonstrate in this practice, that he is problem solving, that he is acquiring a new skill, that he's able to collaborate with his partner, that he's able to think aloud, that he's able to reflect on his own learning, and that he has acquired sufficient knowledge about the task at hand. Thank you for watching.
Hi, this is Rob McMillan for CLS 202, and this is neonate resuscitation. So mum's just delivered a baby less than a minute ago. Once the baby is out, we're vigorously rubbing the baby to agitate the baby, and to also stimulate the baby to take its first couple of breaths. Particularly if the baby's not doing that, we're doing an ABCAR score pretty much straight away. So we're looking for signs of life, we're looking for movement, we're looking for coloration and not cyanosis in the body. At the moment, the baby is very floppy and unresponsive, so we're going to check an airway first, making sure that the baby's in the neutral position, not the sniffing position, because that can obstruct its airway as well. Checking for whether the lungs are rising and falling, and we're checking for a pulse. And when we check for a pulse, we can check in the femoral position, in the brachial position, or the carotid position. And when we do check that, we'll also be tapping out the pulse rate so that my partner can hear it, and he can determine as well whether that is fast, slow, or normal. So it should be around 100 or more, so it should be fairly quick like that. So if we've discovered, okay, this baby has no pulse and the baby is not breathing, we've confirmed cardiac arrest. Before we start cardiac arrest, we're going to give the baby 2 rescue breaths with a neonate BVM, which is a much smaller one, so it's only 250 mils. We're not going to give the baby all of that necessarily. Straight into the mouth, being very careful, and 2 rescue breaths, looking for rise and fall in the chest, taking the baby and giving compression. So it's going to be 3 to 1. I'm calling my partner in at the moment, Rick. Yep. Rick, can you take care of the BVM for me and giving 3 to 1, yep, and ventilate, and then 3 to 1. Yep. We're going to continue that for about 10 cycles or 30 seconds. Yep. After 30 seconds, we're just going to reassess the baby, give it another ABCAR score. Maybe if the baby is showing signs of life, start giving a little bit more agitation. If not, if the baby still does not have a pulse, we're continuing with 3 compressions, yep, and 1 rescue breath. 3 compressions, yep, and another breath. And we'll continue to do that. Remember, we've got mum here as well. Mum's probably a bit distraught at this stage, so we need to be aware of mum as well, and the well-being of mum. And we'd already called for backup earlier because we'd never done this before, so the help is on the way, so hopefully they'll be here shortly. And we continue CPR, 3 compressions of the chest to 1 rescue breath, and reassessing every 30 seconds. Making sure that we may need to do some suctioning. Remember, we may need to turn the baby over to help clear the throat. And that's about it, I hope. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for your speech. I'm very impressed by your presentation. You focused on education change in the post-COVID-19. I strongly agree with you. Professional development should be available.